Hello, everyone. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Nice to see you. Well, I can't quite see you, but you can see me. We're sharing the camera, we're sharing the slides. Thanks a lot. Today is simplifying Sarbanes-Oxley compliance. I'd like to say using DevOps. We'll say in DevOps. My name is Grant Fritchey. I work for Redgate Software, and we're going to get started. This is my contact information. If after today you've got questions on this topic or pretty much any other, I'd be more than willing to try to help out. So you've got my blog, my email address, my Twitter handle, and my YouTube channel. Please reach out, get in touch. If there's something I can do to help with this topic, I want to try to do it. So don't hesitate. Also, as we go through today, if you have questions, please go ahead. There's a little questions window. You can type questions right into there. You guys will be muted through this whole broadcast, but you can type questions in and I will try to answer them as we go along, assuming they're pertinent. If you're asking me oddball questions, I might not answer them. Just kidding. Anyway, one other bit of housekeeping, we will record this session and the recording will get posted onto redgate.com someplace. And so if you want to watch it again later or share it with others, you will be able to make sure that other people can get in touch and get a hold of this information. All right, so with that, let's go ahead and get started with the actual presentation itself. Now, our goals today are pretty simple. I am a huge advocate of DevOps. I've been doing it for a very, very long time. I've been doing it for so long, I didn't know it was called DevOps. I just thought it was called my job. But believe it or not, DevOps is not that new. DevOps is a mechanism of communication. DevOps is not, an assignment that one person gets. DevOps is something that your team or your organization embraces and does. And the fact is that we're going to talk about a bunch of ways that DevOps and something like Sarbanes-Oxley actually hook together so that you guys can understand better ways that DevOps can help all of the work you have to do to make Sarbanes-Oxley a reality within your organization. I mean, I will probably start calling it SOX at some point because saying Sarbanes-Oxley over and over again is kind of tough. The other thing we want to do is I want to talk about the mechanisms that are necessary to ensure that you meet compliance. Compliance is a huge deal and becoming more and more so. It's not going to shrink. We're going to see more compliance requirements. We'll talk about that in a little bit, but hopefully we'll talk about it enough that you guys get some of the understanding of some of the things you have to do. And then most importantly, lastly, how to ensure we hit compliance without impacting our ability to deliver software more frequently, faster, and more accurately, which is one of the major goals of DevOps, is the ability to get stuff out the door as fast as possible, as safe and correctly as possible. So hopefully this is what you came here to hear and see today. And with that, we'll keep going. Now, I have goals, but I also have caveats. I want to make sure I'm really clear because we're talking about Sarbanes-Oxley, which is a huge, huge topic. And it's really important that I establish right up front, I am not offering you legal advice. I want to be just crystal on this. I am not offering legal advice. I am not a lawyer. I do not play one on TV. And I am not telling you legally what you need to do. My discussion today will be focused on techniques, technical aspects, and yeah, I will talk some about my understanding of the law, but understand that my information here cannot, should not be construed as legal advice. No, I'm not legally required to say any of that stuff. I'm just saying it to make sure I help you guys out better. I don't want you thinking that I've got some sort of legal understanding that I do not have. Also, I find it really important for people to understand that Sarbanes-Oxley, I mean, And when we talk about it, over and over again in technology, I mean, we've been talking about it since before it, was finally passed as a law. I've been involved in tech at least that long, and the conversations we have are very technical. And the conversations we're going to have today, some of them are very technical. But the fact of the matter is that you need to address this from a business problem, from the business space. Your law team, your finance team, your business team have got to be engaged with this first and foremost. It is not primarily a technical issue. There are huge technical impacts, and definitely we're going to be discussing some of those, or as many of them as we can, really. But it is first and last a business problem. And in case I didn't mention it, I am not a lawyer, so please don't construe any of this as legal advice. With those caveats in place, let's start talking. So, the most important thing we can do initially is establish what Sarbanes-Oxley is. And the thing is that Sarbanes-Oxley came out of a whole bunch of different issues. The big one was Enron, and largely it was all about fraud. I mean, it was really about businesses hiding their finances such that they were able to steal through fraud. They were able to just take money from people, illegally. I mean, it was just a paperwork version of holding a gun to someone's head and taking their money. And so they came up with this whole thing, Sarbanes-Oxley, and they applied it primarily to publicly traded companies. And don't get excited if you're working for a private organization, because if you're working for a private organization that does CPA work, Sarbanes-Oxley applies to you as well. But it goes even further than that, because if you're doing a privately traded company and you wanted to have a way to ensure that you can tell people that you're protecting their finances correctly, what do people do? They follow the Sarbanes-Oxley rules. So there's a lot of organizations that are using Sarbanes-Oxley for what they do. And so you just need to make sure that you plan for that when you start setting things up. And the goal of Sarbanes-Oxley was literally to hold financial directors of the organizations individually responsible for the stuff that goes on inside the organization. So that you can't simply say, well, it's the org, nobody's fault. Nothing we can do, nothing I can do, certainly. Off we go. Often, we stole millions of your dollars, billions of your dollars, and that's it, all done. Nope. Sarbanes-Oxley makes the financial people within your organization individually responsible. Therefore, you might notice that when they come down for some of the reviews and the audits that are going to occur from Sarbanes-Oxley, they may seem a little tense. This is why. So you need to know that, be forgiving of that, be understanding of that, and deal with the fact that these guys are individually being held responsible for the information. So, when one of these ladies shows up and is doing the audits, be nice to them, because they're the ones that are going to bear the burden of what's going on. Now, I already said it, but I should mention, private organizations are using SOX as a guideline. It is not something that is strictly within publicly traded companies. They are not subject to the prosecution standards, except, and this is the fun bit, when it comes to information. If you read the laws and you read some of the case law that's come out on it, some of the subject information, the financial data, some of the private information, actually applies to private companies when the laws that are being violated are subject to federal prosecution. So if you're doing some kind of thing that could involve a federal prosecution, and again, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not even going to try to come up with good ones, that actually makes you subject to Sarbanes-Oxley for your finances. which suggests that since almost every one of us, there's some metric someplace I saw once, it's like every person violates, I forget what the exact number is, violates X number of federal laws per day. If we're violating that many laws per day unknowingly, it's just a question of them finding the ones they want to prosecute us under. I would strongly suggest that means that every organization probably should be, if not perfectly following Sarbanes-Oxley, roughly mirroring Sarbanes-Oxley. So they have what we call in the old GDPR days, which are months old now, a defensible position, that you've done your due diligence following Sarbanes-Oxley in order to arrive at a place where you can, if you are subject to federal prosecution, if you're trying to sell the privacy of your organization and the protection that your organization offers, you can display a defensible position, that you've done the due diligence and the necessary things as defined by SOX to arrive at a place that makes your stuff safer. Hopefully that's real clear. Again, if you guys have questions, just let me know. So, business stuff aside, let's start talking tech, because that's where I'm more comfortable. And Sarbanes-Oxley has 4 really big areas where it's going to concentrate your mind as a tech person. And you've got them right there on the screen. And it really is, I'm going to go in reverse order just because I find it more interesting. Unlike HIPAA gets very, very specific about access control. Sarbanes-Oxley kind of doesn't care who so much has access to your information. What they really care about is that you are tracking who has access to your information. It's not a matter of, well, I'm the DBA, therefore I get in. It's, fine, we don't care if you're the DBA, if you're the dev or anybody else. I just want to know exactly who in your organization has access to this information. I further need to know in your organization who can change this information. That's a big deal. You also get a lot of rules around retention. You must keep this data for certain periods of time, depending on the data that we're talking about. They've also got a lot of stuff on security. It gets more vague in the security area. Yeah, you got to lock things off. Yeah, you probably should be doing encryption. There's some other areas around that, but it's a bit more amorphous, I've found, at least in my readings, in my audits that I've gone through. It's not like there was like a good security standard that we had to follow. It was a whole lot more suggestions, and it was kind of frustrating, really. And then finally, auditing. Auditing is huge, huge, huge. And talking about it from a DevOps standpoint, they don't simply want to audit the data access that you're going through. That's important. They don't simply want to audit the data changes. That's important. If you're changing structure, if you're changing process, if you're changing code, they would like to audit that as well. And if you don't have a process whereby we make changes to source control, therefore we know who made the change. We deploy from source control, therefore we know who made the deployment. We know how the deployment was made. We know which sections of code were deployed. If we're not following a pretty good DevOps process, auditing gets a whole lot harder in support of Sarbanes-Oxley. So now let's drill down and start talking about what's going on. If we're talking about data, and if we're talking about databases, what we want to talk about in order to meet Sarbanes-Oxley is compliant database DevOps. We have to do the things that we're doing, right? There's no getting around the idea that we're not going to deliver change. Every business is changing. That's fine. What we're going to do is adapt the methodology of DevOps that allows us to automate those changes so that we're not simply making changes by hand, which are prone to error, which are prone to issue, that are harder to audit because you're doing them by hand. There's no record of what you did necessarily. So we're going to be automating stuff. We're going to standardize all of our development so that we do it all the same way. All the deployments go out the same way. All the methods go out the same way. Again, this is all going back to compliance. It's not simply about DevOps. It's about how DevOps can help us deliver on compliance. Obviously, we're focusing on protecting the data, but that really is about the methodologies of ensuring that we can provision our non-production environments in a way that we're masking or replacing the data that should not be available to individuals, that's not being audited, or that we don't want to have to audit. So we make data changes and make that part of our automated process to get it all back out of the way so that we're able to move into non-production environments without causing problems. And then finally, of course, we're going to monitor it, right? And that never goes away. We're going to keep track of what goes on. From a security standpoint, absolutely. From an auditing standpoint, absolutely. But also from a change tracking to understand what's happening and where things have gone so we know what's happening. And all of this leads us back to ensuring that DevOps feeds our compliance with SOX. And it's really, that's the focus. So let's start drilling down on what's necessary to meet Sarbanes-Oxley compliance. We've got to do three things. So we have to do the work that we're doing, right? So we have to make changes. We have to do the deployments. We have to have all that stuff in place. And we have to be able to support our auditing because it's a necessary aspect of what's going on within Sarbanes-Oxley. How can we track and see what's going on? And then finally, we need to ensure that we can automate all these processes to meet Sarbanes-Oxley. And so my first big suggestion to you, if you're trying to meet compliance, start with your production environment. Meet the compliance there first. Ensure that that's protected properly. Ensure that it's got the security in place. Ensure that everything that you need to audit is audited there first. Get that done. Don't try to work your way up to production. Get the production information done first, and then work backwards. What can we expose outside of our production environment? Okay, great, this information. What can we not expose outside of our production environment? This information. Excellent. Can we then set up an automated methodology to allow us to provision a non-production environment that allows us to, get production-like information, production structures, and production-like information into these non-production environments in an automated and safe way. Further, that supports our audit trail. So we know if someone says, well, look, you've got this database over here in a non-production environment, what's going on? Well, we have this automated methodology that scripts, and here's the script, by the way, Mr. Auditor, that scripts out how we make the changes and shows us what changes we make. And here's all the ways that we mask the data so that it cannot be seen by non-authorized personnel. And therefore, once it's over here, it is no longer Sarbanes-Oxley data. It is no longer tracked. It is no longer audited, but it is now safe. And so we've met those requirements. So that's one of the first things we have to do. So when we talk about provisioning, when we talk about that automation process, there are a number of steps we will have to take. And now some of your data you're going to access. If you're an administrator, whether you want to call yourself a DBA or not, but if you're an administrator on a database in production or a database server in production, you have access to data, and that came out weird. Your processes and your access must be tracked. Therefore, you are one of the authorized users that will have to be documented within your SOX compliance audits. But the goal here is to get our production data into non-production environments. Therefore, you have access and you are authorized and you will be tracked. But the first thing we have to do is change our data to a non-production format in order to arrive at a place where we are not exposing data to unauthorized people. These people are not authorized, and that's great, which means we don't have to audit them, we don't have to track them, we don't have to keep track of what they're doing and why they're doing it and how they're doing it. All we have to do is give them this information. Now, that does mean that we've got to do something with that production data. And that's actually the hard part of this process, because it's easy enough to strip off access, remove unauthorized users, remove authorized users, and change them to the unauthorized users. That's a very simple set of scripts for a database. You can do a backup, do a restore to a non-production environment that's protected, by the way. Strip those users, easy, done. Data. Okay, well, option one, throw it all away. Okay, we're gonna have to drill down on that. Option two, make some changes. Well, where? We'll have to drill down on that too. Option three, create funny fake data. Okay, we'll have to drill down on that as well. And we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail in a minute. But the next thing you want to do is you want to make sure this process is documented. And frankly, the easiest way to document a process is not to document a process. We do A, we do B, we do C, we do D. The easiest way to document a process is to automate the process. The automation engine is the documentation. How do you provision your databases? How do you get your non-production databases? I'm sorry, how do you get your production databases into a non-production environment? Well, we run this script or this set of scripts, however you do it. And that is documentation, because it's, well, it gets restored over here to this server, which is protected, and we have to do this, we remove these things, and we make these changes, and we do this, and we do this, we do this. And it's all laid out in such a way that that is documentation. That's a documented process because it is an automated process. Automation becomes a documentation process. Guess what? The more automation we do through DevOps style work, the easier it actually becomes to start doing Sarbanes-Oxley. Yay, right? Easy is good. Because I'm lazy. I want it to be as easy as possible. So let's talk about the data. Like I said, we're going to address this in a minute. The issue with the data that we have is that we have to classify it. We have to know which data can be moved. We have to know which data can't be moved. And we have to know this. It's not, we shouldn't have to guess. We're going to have to involve legal people. We're going to have to involve business people. We cannot do this from a technical standpoint without their input. No one is going to run any tool. And there are great tools out there, and I would love to talk to you about nothing but tools, but we're not doing that today. There are great tools out there, but they're not going to replace the legal and business definitions that you have to come up with. And you must find and identify and label the information that cannot be moved. Now, one of the easiest ways to label stuff, at least if we're talking SQL Server, is extended events. Make a mark on a column, make a mark on a table. This is data that must be cleaned, that kind of thing. However you mark it, but you've got to do it. If you do not have a definition on that data, and however you define it, again, I'm not telling you how you have to, but if you don't have a definition, that data should not leave your production environment. Flat, simple. If it's in production and you are a Sarbanes-Oxley organization, that data must be defined as legally okay to move, legally not okay to move, or it's not. If it's not classified, do not move it. It has to be a rule that you establish and maintain within yourself. Once you've got the classifications, though, then you can work on data masking. And the reason I emphasize data masking is because creating your own data, well, having no data at all in non-production environments is useless. Testing, deployment, development won't work. I mean, it's very, very difficult at that point because nothing works the way it would in the real world, and therefore all of your testing is a waste of time. All of your development is more difficult, if not just complete waste of your time. We have to have data. Easy way to have data, create it yourself. Okay, cool. So we add one row to every table, and therefore we can validate that things work. Well, yeah, but this query does this aggregation thing, so you might not need more than one row, or this query has to sort information, so we might need more than one row. So then we have to start saying, well, okay, let's load in a bunch of rows. All right, cool. Do they all have the same values? Well, then we're not really testing our indexes. We're not really testing our methodologies of deployment. We're not, and so you realize that not only do you have to have data, and as much of it as you can get, because you want it to be as close as possible to production, but that data has to be distributed like production, that it has to be behaving like production. One of my favorite new topics, because I worked for an insurance company and never had to deal with this, so I really didn't know about it, although we did do Sarbanes-Oxley compliance, was the PCI information was credit cards. And I had no idea until just recently that credit cards contain so much behavioral information that it marks what kind of bank, which specific bank, a unique ID number for the individual within that bank, and then a checksum value at the end. All of this data, you can't simply just throw in some random 15 or 16 numbers, or I'm sorry, 16 or 17 numbers for a credit card. You actually have to make sure that these things still behave the same way. So your masking has to meet, behavioral information, distribution information, and volumetric information. Building that is hard. Masking it's a heck of a lot easier. And again, I am lazy. Now, no questions so far? Cool. Well, we'll keep going then. So the first up, if you read the law, and I've read through, I didn't read all of it. I freely admit I didn't read all of it, but I've read through a massive chunk of it. The areas where you would need to focus if you are interested in pursuing this information directly, and I recommend you do. It's great that you're watching some sort of summary like what I give or someone else, but I strongly recommend you go in and read this stuff yourself. The two areas where you definitely have to focus is sections 302 on the protection mechanisms and section 404 on the business processes. Now, section 404 has lots and lots of talk about all the different kinds of punishment and all that different things that are coming up and all the things that, that are going to happen to you if you get it wrong. But it also talks about the processes of business that are applied by Sarbanes-Oxley. 302 talks about the protection mechanisms, and again, mainly about auditing, primarily about auditing, but also talking about retention, big sections on retention. So between these two, you get most of the idea of what it is that you ought to be doing. What they don't supply is how you get it done. So that's where things get really tough. So if we want to start saying like, look, I want a provision for DevOps, right? I'm ready for DevOps. I want to get this done. How do I get this done? Easy. I'm going to give you 5 easy steps that'll get you going on this. Step 1, starting with production. Remember I talked day 1 at the beginning of the session. Work backwards from production. Step 1, we have to classify that data. We need to know which data we can move and which data we can't. We need to know which data must be masked and which data doesn't necessarily have to be masked, or which data we just don't care about. We need to classify that and mark everything. If it's not marked, it doesn't move. This has to become a new mantra for you if you're dealing with Sarbanes-Oxley. Secondly, we have to automate the cleansing of this information, because if we do not automate it, if we try to do this from a manual process, we're going to be hitting problems because we're going to screw up. And there's no easy way to fix manual screw-ups except more manual processes, which lead to more screw-ups. So automation, while yes, you can screw things up automatically, as a matter of fact, automation is a great way to screw things up fast. It's also a great way to fix things. Secondarily, the automation that you build that cleanses this data to ensure that you're setting up provisioning for your Sarbanes-Oxley compliance leads to the documentation that you need for Sarbanes-Oxley. The automation itself either becomes or sets it up for you to automatically get documentation, because you can just say, step 1, we do this, step 2, we do that, step 3, we do that. It's easy. Next thing, get the legal team. Make sure that you have an internal audit on all the processes that you're setting up and all the methodologies that you're approaching, that they think, yeah, this is great. Oh my God, you've got this much information? Hey, that's winning. You should have seen what the last person did. Get them to walk through these things and sorry, my wife just came home. Get them to walk through these things and ensure that they know what you're doing and how, so that they can sign off on it. And then finally start doing your provisioning. Now, I've got a question is what kind of approach would you recommend to a DB or dev who thinks they should be concerned about this, but nobody's been doing anything? Like, how do we convince our managers that we're involved? Wow, that's a hard question, because if the company is not doing stuff, then you're kind of on your own. And if you're on your own, should you be worried about it? And the short answer is no. I know that sounds odd, but no, you shouldn't be worried about it, because if you're not part of the financial organization of the infrastructure, you're not personally held responsible. Now, morally, ought you to worry about this? Yes. And how do you bring it up to your boss? Is that a simplest thing I can say is like, geez, aren't we under Sarbanes-Oxley? We're publicly traded and there's finances and stuff. And I mean, I know some of the data I'm moving around. Shouldn't I be worried about this? And if they're saying like, nah, it's fine, you can go, really? Can you get that to me in writing somehow? Because I'm curious. You need to understand why you're able to do things and why you're not. And I would ask the questions. You're not legal, you're not a lawyer, and you're not responsible for this stuff. But from a technical standpoint, can you kill that? From a technical standpoint, you're the one who's going to have to deliver or not deliver. And yeah, you can still get called in for the audit, and better still, you can get called in for all the prosecutions that come along later. So I would at least want to understand what's going on. While you can't be prosecuted, you don't need to worry about that stuff. And, you know, as a technical person, you're just kind of like, hey, man, I'm at the bottom of the food chain. What do I care? It's not a good way to be responsible within the organization. You want to care. You want to contribute. Heck, you want to be looked upon as somebody who does the right things for the right reasons. And that's what I would do is I would just start the conversation. There's nothing you have to do immediately out of the gate, but have that conversation with your boss if you haven't had it already. Hopefully that answers that question. Now, so what do we do for deployments? Deployments is easy. We start off first with source control, right? Nice 6 steps this time instead of 5. We start off with source control because source control acts as an auditing mechanism. Source control lets us know who changed what, when. What got changed? How did it get changed? What method, what did we do to it? All of that stuff is documented within source control, especially if you also comment your changes as you make them. Please do that. With source control as your driver, then you can start to automate deployments. Once you start automating deployments, as we've already talked about, automation becomes a documentation mechanism. Now, once again, I would recommend that you validate this stuff with legal, that you're not simply doing things, but that you're ensuring that, hey, you've told us we must be Sarbanes-Oxley compliant. Here is what we are doing to arrive at that. Is this what you expected? Is there more you need, or is this adequate? You need to have that conversation with them. They have to take part to ensure that the things you're doing are correct. Then you start automating the deployments. Now, automating the deployments is really all about eating the elephant. It's one step at a time. This is one where you don't move backwards from production. You're going to move forwards from the most raw possible, it worked on my laptop moment, to now I'm ready to automate my deployments into production. You go forward from there. This one is not backwards. But what is backwards is you must automate the security validation. So as you're moving forward through these environments, you've got mechanisms in place that test that you're not violating security as you do these deployments. And then finally, log the automation. log it, log it, log it. What was deployed when? That is kept. Why? Because that is part of your documentation trail for audits later. We made this change to the database, which affected this column, which updated this data. When did you do that? June 22nd, 3:22 p.m. Awesome, right? We're good. Keep going along those lines. These are the steps we must take to ensure that we're, using DevOps in support of Sarbanes-Oxley. So, what about monitoring? Well, the first thing I would say is that we do have to monitor both production and non-production environments. Yes, we don't need to monitor non-production environments in the same way that we monitor production. They're not, it's not the same, but we have to know what's going on in all of our systems. We can't simply guess. We need to know which servers are online, which servers are off. We need to know further which databases and what versions of those databases have been moved to which environments. So we're tracking this information so we know, not so we can guess, but we know what the situation is. Because if we're tracking it, if we're automating it, again, the tracking and the automation that we're doing leads to audit trails. And it's all about knowing what's going on, because if you know, then documenting what's happening is very, very simple. We also need to know what's going on in our production systems, and especially with our backups, because that data retention period that is a legal requirement of Sarbanes-Oxley, it's kind of on us to ensure that we're meeting it through some mechanism or other. If we're doing, if we're moving everything into a data warehouse or however we're doing it, we've got the documentation in place that we know this data moved from this place to this place, and we know how it got there. And we've got the monitoring in place to ensure it's available online, and we've got the monitoring in place to know how and when changes were made, so that we're able to document our processes and arrive at a place where we know what's happening and we can show it when the audit lady comes into the office. We don't get surprised. She doesn't get surprised. Everyone's got a good understanding of what's happening. So with this, if we're going through the process of standardizing our development to ensure that we're doing everything the same way, that we're working in teams and all that fun stuff, but further that we're automating what we do so that we're creating a documentation as we go. We're protecting and preserving the data better because we're able to deliver more knowledge about what has changed, how it has changed, how we're moving code up the chain, how we're moving data down the chain. And then we've got monitoring in place so that we know it's available, that it's performing correctly, and who's been accessing it and why and how things have gotten in. All of this allows us to make the data safer while still delivering value better. Now, with this, hopefully we've talked about the ways in which Sarbanes-Oxley is directly related to DevOps, because again, it's one of my big pushes is that I honestly believe that DevOps and DevOps methodologies, and especially the automation aspects of DevOps, is very much a method for meeting compliance infrastructures that we have to do. And the whole idea here is to completely meet all of the legal requirements that are necessary without slowing down, without stopping the rapid deployment that the modern methodologies need, that the modern businesses need to ensure that we're meeting the goals that we have. Now, are there any questions outstanding? Let me just look over here. I don't see any. All right. So, my name is Grant Fritchey. This is my contact information. Before you go, I would like to point out one other thing. In New York on October 12th, in London in October 18th, and in Chicago on October 26th of this year, 2018, we are going to be hosting a live, in-person SQL in the City Summit. 3 events, 3 locations, 3 different days, and these are for high-level leaders in your organizations who are responsible for data movement, data management, and please, please, please follow the link and register now, because this is going to be a great event. There's going to be some fantastic people, Bob Ward, Bob Pusateri, myself, others, and we're going to be presenting a lot of great information. So Redgate SQL in the City Summit, October 12th, 18th, and 26th in New York, London, and Chicago. Unfortunately, I won't make the Chicago event, but I will be in New York and London. Did any other questions come in while I was talking? No? Well, with that, we are done with our presentation for today. Thank you very much for coming.